Okay, picture this. It's Saturday morning in the mid-1980s. If you turned on the radio, chances are you were hearing Wham, Foreigner, or Billy Ocean belt out their hit singles. The Cosby Show and Webster were ruling the sitcom world, and Eddie Murphy's Beverly Hills Cop was tops at the box office. But considering it's Saturday morning, most of your friends are probably sleeping in, watching Saturday morning cartoons, or getting ready to hang out at the local mall. But you're not doing any of that. You're sitting inside a silent, echoey high school building, and you're there for one reason and one reason only: full-day detention. Except you're not alone. You're stuck in a room with other teenagers who, on the surface, couldn't be more different from you. There's the popular girl, the star athlete, the brainy straight-A kid, the dangerous troublemaker, and the quiet, eccentric outsider. 5 kids, 5 distinct high school cliques, one single Saturday. And somehow, over the course of 8 grueling hours, those 5 strangers begin to realize that beneath the labels, they share the exact same fears, pressures, and heartbreaks. That was a deceptively simple premise behind one of the biggest coming-of-age films of the 20th century, John Hughes' The Breakfast Club. Released in theaters on February 15, 1985, The Breakfast Club didn't rely on explosive action set pieces, special effects, or wild location changes. For 90% of the runtime, we're simply watching 5 teenagers sit in a room and talk. Despite its simple premise, it remains a cultural touchstone that every new generation stumbles upon and claims as their own. So grab your lunch bag, pull up a chair, and don't make a sound. Today, we're heading back to Shermer High School to spend a Saturday in detention. To truly appreciate how The Breakfast Club reshaped cinema, we have to look at the landscape of teen movies in the early 1980s. Back then, Hollywood largely viewed high schoolers as a demographic to be sold raunchy comedies or slasher flicks. But writer-director John Hughes saw something entirely different. Hughes understood that teenagers weren't just caricatures. They were human beings wrestling with real emotional weight. Let's face it, as teens we carried the crushing anxiety of parental expectations, the terror of social exile, questions about intimacy, and the agonizing urge to fit in. After proving his comedic chops with National Lampoon's Vacation and making his directorial debut with 1984's 16 Candles, Hughes decided to strip away all the theatrical gimmicks for his next project. No wild road trips, no crazy party antics, just raw, unfiltered dialogue between 5 teenagers forced into a confined space. According to the American Film Institute, production kicked off in March of 1984 and wrapped just 2 months later in April. To capture the authentic, claustrophobic feel of a suburban Midwest high school, Hughes took his cast and crew to the abandoned Maine North High School in Des Plaines, Illinois. That empty building didn't just serve as a backdrop, it became the ultimate filmmaking hub. The production team set up editing suites, administrative offices, and prop shops right inside the unused classrooms. More importantly, it gave birth to the most iconic fictional school in cinema history, Shermer High. When these 5 students walk through the library doors on Saturday morning, Hughes establishes their social standing immediately. They aren't introduced by their real names. They're identified by their labels. First up is Brian Johnson, the Brain, played by Anthony Michael Hall. Brian is the textbook overachiever whose entire self-worth is tied to his GPA, driven by parents who treat anything less than perfection as an absolute failure. Next, walking in with the world on his shoulders is Andrew Clark, the athlete, portrayed by Emilio Estevez. As a varsity wrestler, Andrew possesses the physique and popularity every guy envies. Yet beneath that varsity jacket is a kid suffocating under his father's toxic demand for dominance. Then comes Claire Standish, the princess, played by Molly Ringwald. Dressed in pristine leather and pink silk, Claire embodies wealth and social royalty, but her polished exterior masks a girl trapped between her parents' bitter divorce and the constant dread of losing her social status. Creeping into the room silently is Allison Reynolds, the basket case, played by Ali Sheedy. She's the mysterious, black-clad outcast who hides behind a wall of hair and bizarre habits, largely because her family ignores her existence altogether. And finally, stomping into detention with combat boots and an oversized trench coat is John Bender, the criminal. Played with razor-sharp charisma by Judd Nelson, Bender's obnoxious, aggressive, and fiercely intelligent. He delights in picking at everyone's insecurities and flatly refuses to bow to authority, most notably the authority of the man keeping watch over them. Enter Principal Richard Vernon, played with stern, wary authority by veteran actor Paul Gleason.
Don't mess with the bull, young man. You'll get the horns.
Vernon views these 5 kids not as developing adults, but as delinquents who require strict behavioral modification. He sets the day's singular task: write a 1,000-word essay explaining who they think they are. It's an assignment Bender immediately mocks, setting off a psychological chess match between a bitter administrator and 5 kids with nothing left to lose. Looking back today, the chemistry between the main cast feels so natural that it seems as though the roles were written specifically for them. But the journey to locking in the Brat Pack was filled with fascinating casting shifts. Take Molly Ringwald, for instance. Hughes originally envisioned her playing the quirky, introverted role of Allison, but Ringwald felt a deep pull towards Claire. She advocated strongly for the part, convincing Hughes that she could bring genuine vulnerability to the popular girl stereotype instead of making her a shallow mean girl. Hughes listened, reassigned the roles, and brought in Ali Sheedy for Allison, a decision that fundamentally elevated the movie's emotional dynamic. Even more drastic was the casting of John Bender. Before Judd Nelson stepped into the heavy boots and fingerless gloves, another rising young star was actually cast in the role, John Cusack. Hughes even brought Cusack to rehearsal, but as the character's dark, aggressive edge developed, Hughes felt Cusack didn't project the dangerous, blue-collar volatility that Bender needed. He made the tough call to recast, bringing in Judd Nelson. Nelson leaned so heavily into the role's rebellious intensity, even staying in character off camera and picking on Ringwald to maintain that genuine friction, that Hughes almost fired him mid-production. It took the rest of the cast jumping in to defend Nelson to keep him in the film. Rounding out the group was Anthony Michael Hall, who, along with Ringwald, had already built a tight creative shorthand with Hughes on 16 Candles. That mutual trust allowed Hughes to push these young actors into deeply emotional territory that few directors of the era dared to explore. You know, casting into these deep casting what-ifs and location secrets is one of my favorite parts of hosting this show. And if you love these retro deep dives as much as I do, you've got to join our Bite-Sized Nostalgia weekly newsletter on Beehive. Every Saturday morning, I send out a free, quick-read breakdown packed with rare behind-the-scenes photos, forgotten 70s, 80s, 90s pop culture trivia, and retro movie lore that I just can't fit into a podcast. It's the ultimate weekly dose of childhood nostalgia delivered straight to your inbox. Head over to the link right at the top of today's episode description to subscribe for free. You'll be glad you did. Now, let's get back to Detention. When you ask anyone what they remember visually about the Breakfast Club, their mind instantly goes to that towering 2-story high school library. It feels grand and warm and utterly iconic. But here's a fantastic piece of production magic. That library wasn't real. When the location scouts surveyed the actual abandoned Maine North High School, they discovered the existing library was far too small to accommodate a full camera crew, lighting rigs, and dynamic wide shots. So Hughes and his design team built a massive, custom-designed 2-story library set right inside the school's abandoned gymnasium. Building the set inside the closed school provided a unique advantage: absolute isolation. The young actors weren't driving off to studio lots or stepping out into Hollywood traffic every day. They were spending long, repetitive hours inside an old school building. That sense of enclosure leaked into their performances. Locked in that room together, the characters and the actors had nowhere to run. They were forced to interact, setting the stage for the narrative's emotional breakthrough. During the first half of the film, the group behaves exactly as society expects them to. They trade insults, posture defensively, and throw cheap jabs at one another's social standing. Bender mocks Claire's wealth. Claire dismisses Bender as trash. Andrew defends Claire out of athletic bravado. Brian even tries desperately to keep the peace. And Allison sits silently in the corner, eating a sandwich made of Cap'n Crunch cereal and pixie sticks. But as the afternoon wears on and the sun begins to dip, the emotional armor begins to crack. In a scene that was largely built around raw emotional truth, the 5 teenagers sit in a circle on the library carpet and start talking, not as stereotypes, but as terrified kids. Andrew breaks down, confessing that he physically tormented a weaker student just to win the approval of his overbearing father. Brian tearfully reveals that he brought a flare gun to school and considered taking his own life because he failed at a shop class project. Claire admits the crushing weight of being a pawn in her parents' spiteful marriage. Allison opens up about the devastating neglect she experiences at home. And Bender's defensive rage is exposed for what it truly is, a coping mechanism for severe domestic abuse. In that single, quiet afternoon, the fundamental illusion of high school vanishes. The athlete realizes the princess isn't happy. The brain realizes the athlete is drowning. And the criminal realizes he isn't the only one carrying immense pain. They aren't 5 distinct stereotypes anymore. They're 5 human beings discovering empathy for the very first time. There's another label that became attached to several of the young actors in the Breakfast Club, one that would follow them for years, the Brat Pack. The term became famous in 1985 after New York Magazine published a story about a group of young Hollywood actors who were becoming some of the biggest stars of the decade. Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Rob Lowe, Demi Moore, and Molly Ringwald were among the names associated with the label. And the funny thing is, the Breakfast Club had already spent nearly 2 hours showing us why labels can be misleading. The brain, the athlete, the princess, the basket case, the criminal. 5 people reduced to 5 words. And suddenly, the actors playing them were being reduced to another label, the Brat Pack. It was catchy, it was great for magazine covers, and it became part of 80s pop culture. But many of the actors weren't exactly thrilled about it. Instead of being talked about individually, as actors with different careers and different ambitions, they were increasingly treated as members of a club. And that irony is hard to miss. The Breakfast Club is essentially a movie about how unfair it can be to judge someone based on a label. Then Hollywood gave its young stars a label of its own. Of course, the Brat Pack became part of the mythology of 80s Hollywood, and several of those actors would go on to have major careers. Emilio Estevez would star in St. Elmo's Fire and later direct films. Molly Ringwald became one of the defining stars of the John Hughes era. Judd Nelson continued working in film and television. Anthony Michael Hall would eventually move beyond his familiar teenage roles and take on very different characters. And Ali Sheedy would continue building a career of her own, including her memorable performances in War Games and later Short Circuit. But whenever you see the actors together in the Breakfast Club, it's difficult not to think of them as a group of teenagers in the library. And maybe that's because the movie captured something that went beyond the actors themselves. It captured a particular moment in pop culture. The clothes, the music, the hairstyles, the personalities, and the idea that 5 completely different kids could walk into a room, spend one Saturday together, and discover that the things separating them weren't nearly as important as what they thought. The Brat Pack was a label, but the Breakfast Club was about looking past the label. And that's probably why the movie has lasted much longer than the nickname ever did. Beyond the dialogue, 2 crucial elements elevated the Breakfast Club into a pop culture monument: the music and the dancing. When John Hughes was assembling the film's soundtrack, music supervisor Keith Forsey approached a rising Scottish band called Simple Minds to record the film's theme song, Don't You Forget About Me. Believe it or not, Simple Minds initially turned down the song. They wanted to perform their own written material, not a song composed for a movie soundtrack. It took repeated persuasion from Forsey in the studio to get them to record it. That reluctant recording session yielded the defining track of 1985, rocketing to #1 on the Billboard charts and creating an intro beat that instantly evokes pure 80s nostalgia today. And then there's the famous library dance sequence. After sneaking to Bender's locker, the group lets their collective guard down. The music kicks in, and they unleash a wild dance session across the library balconies. In the original script, that movie was written exclusively for Claire to dance alone, but Molly Ringwald felt awkward carrying a solo dance scene by herself and voiced her hesitation to Hughes. Recognizing that a solo performance broke the collective spirit of the group, Hughes pivoted on the spot. He opened up the scene, telling all 5 actors to improvise their own goofy, expressive moves. The result is pure movie magic. Seeing the brain, the athlete, the princess, the basket case, and the criminal letting go of their anxiety and dancing together isn't just fun. It's the narrative turning point of the entire film. As 4 p.m. approaches, the spell of Saturday Detention comes to an end. The physical transformations are subtle, yet profound. Allison has let Claire do her makeup, stepping out from behind her wall of hair. Claire has given Bender one of her diamond earrings. Andrew and Allison have shared a quiet kiss. And Brian has been tasked with writing the group's collective essay to Principal Vernon. As their parents' cars pull up to the curb, a quiet dread fills the air. They all know the unspoken truth. Come Monday morning, when the social hierarchy resets in the school hallways, maintaining this bond will be almost impossible. Yet as Brian's voiceover begins to read the letter left on Vernon's desk, we realize that the outcome of Monday morning doesn't erase what happened on Saturday. Brian writes, "Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice a whole Saturday in detention for whatever it was we did wrong. But we think you're crazy to make us write an essay telling you who we think we are. You see us as you want to see us. In the simplest terms, with the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each one of us is a brain and an athlete and a basket case, a princess and a criminal. Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club." The movie closes on one of the most iconic frames in cinematic history. Judd Nelson walking alone across the sunlit football field. He stops, raises his gloved fist into the air in triumphant defiance, and freezes as "Don't You Forget About Me" explodes through the speakers. It's an ending that leaves the future open. We don't know if they stayed best friends or went back to their separate tables. What we know is that one day they truly saw each other. When The Breakfast Club wrapped up its theatrical run, it had grossed over $50 million domestically against a modest $1 million budget, a massive financial success. In 2016, the film received the ultimate artistic validation when the Library of Congress selected The Breakfast Club for preservation in the National Film Registry, citing its immense cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. So why does a low-budget movie about 5 kids sitting in a room talking continue to resonate 40 years later? Because while the haircuts, fashion, and technology change, the fundamental experience of being young never does. Today's teenagers might have smartphones, Instagram, and TikTok, but the internal pressures remain identical. They still worry about fitting in, still feel misunderstood by their parents, and still fear being trapped inside a label assigned to them by their peers. In an era dominated by digital noise, The Breakfast Club stands as a timeless reminder of what happens when we actually sit down, look each other in the eye, and take the time to listen. 4 decades after they walked out of Shermer High School, we still remember Bender, Claire, Andrew, Brian, Allison, and Principal Vernon. We remember the library, the improvised dances, the confessions, and that solitary fist raised high above the football field. Most of all, we remember the truth at the center of it all, that no matter how isolated you feel, the person sitting right next to you might be fighting the exact same battles. Because somewhere deep down inside of all of us, there's still a little bit of the brain in the athlete, the princess, the basket case, and the criminal. Well, that wraps up today's journey back to 1985. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a second to follow the podcast. Leave us a 5-star review and share this episode with the ultimate 80s movie fan in your life. It truly helps nostalgia lovers find our community. And don't forget to grab your free subscription to our weekly bite-sized nostalgia newsletter on Beehive by tapping the link in the show notes below. Because the best thing about nostalgia is that sometimes all it takes is a classic song, a warm memory, or a Saturday in detention to take you right back home. I'm Moonlight Peterson. Thanks for listening. And whatever you do this week, don't you forget about us.